So as we're going through this stuff, if you find anything that you want clarification on, or if you have some specific questions about something, please just shout it out. Do not be shy. Just by way of introduction, my educational background is in expert systems and artificial intelligence. I am absolutely an engineer, and I apologize for that. So hopefully I will be less socially awkward than I've been programmed to be. So this is my fifth startup company. I was the founder of 10X Labs, which was funded by Intel Computer Corporation. I sold that. I was the founder of a esoteric lab company called Seagate, which we sold off to another big lab company, and the founder of Clinic Station, which is a big EMR company that was running MD Anderson for a while until Epic just came in and spent $500 billion putting their system in. So I've spent a little time doing this stuff. A lot of this is sort of, as a teacher in YPO, this has been my experience. I think that's the words I use. What you will find is there's a tremendous amount of variability in this stuff. So what I always tell people is, the key to this stuff is remain iteratively, intellectually flexible, because rigidity will be the death of you. So what I thought we'd do today is just kind of go through some components of what it takes to sort of block and tackle, get a startup going. A lot of this I also teach at Rice University, so a lot of this I teach in my MBA class. But some of this, what I really wanted to provide is just sort of a real life sort of perspective about this stuff. I mean, you can read all this stuff on your own, and I'm going to kind of give you the things that I find that are like sort of real, if you will. So originally they asked for a headshot, and I sent them this photo, and this has come back to bite me. So that's this is literally my bio. This is awesome. Well done. So Will clearly added this in here. This was never be funny. That's the first rule of Fight Club. So we're going to talk a little bit about corporate structure. I'm going to try to get through that stuff pretty quickly. Really, that stuff really has to do with taxation. If you have any specific taxation questions, I recommend you talk to an accountant. Talk a little bit about IP, tech transfer. How many of you are currently grad students at a university and are looking to license tech out of your university? Anybody? How many are currently working at a university, working in a lab, and they think they own the IP that they're creating right now? Oh, there we go. You do, huh?
Yes.
Do you really own the IP?
Well, yes, we have actually with MD Anderson, we have submitted a lot of ideas, and I have a couple of patents pending.
You have patents pending. Is it your lab?
With my boss.
It's your boss's lab. Who's your boss work for?
Lawrence Cooper.
Who does he work for?
Pardon?
Is he an MD Anderson employee?
Yeah,
You don't own the IP. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Go over a little bit teams and roles, talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to play a little fun game called Split My Equity. This is where you will not make friends. It'll be great. By the way, friendship's highly overrated when it comes to business. So you guys are probably familiar a lot of the different types of structures for businesses in the U.S. Honestly, really a lot of them come down to liability and taxation. There's nothing wrong with sole proprietorships and partnerships, right? You basically bear all the taxation responsibility. Basically, when you own a sole proprietorship, you basically file your taxes, and all the revenue and earnings go through. They flow straight through to through your tax filing. The challenge is you sort of open yourself up to litigation. So if you have assets, if you would like to have assets, I recommend you choose some type of corporation filing to protect those assets. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with the sole proprietorship or partnership. They just don't provide any sort of protection for your asset class. Typically what we see, limited liability corporations, S-Corps and C-Corps. LLCs are basically, they provide some asset class protection, right? They open you up to some franchise tax depending upon your state. But again, you're paying your taxes straight through as if you're, as an individual, right? S-Corps, basically S-Corps provide the level of corporate protection. They're treated as entities. The thing that S-Corps really provide a benefit of is self-employment tax, right? Self-employment tax is brutal. So it provides some protection against that. I will tell you this, if you want to absolutely get audited, start an S-Corp and pay yourself some bizarre salary. I guarantee you absolutely will invite the IRS to come knock on your door. So C corporations, those are the most common. How many people expect to raise money for their entity? Excellent. So the reality of it is, if you're going to do a C Corp, you will probably end up as a Delaware C. If you're going to raise money, the only way to create divergent classes of shares is through a corporation, through a C Corp. So a venture capital group or private equity group or an educated angel will expect there to be a C Corp, right? Any questions? Make sense so far? Super exciting.
Why Delaware?
Here we go. Please.
Why Delaware instead of Texas, for instance?
So Delaware is a very corporate-friendly state. They provide additional protection to corporations that the state of Texas doesn't. Nevada is very similar as well. So it's a question of where is the most business-friendly environment. So in the event you find yourself in litigation, right, you have the most business-friendly environment to litigate in. So they tend to be very commercially friendly, where Texas, not as much. Not that you won't see some Texas corps, but predominantly you see Delaware and Nevada C corps.
But if you are in litigation, you have to be in the state of Delaware?
Sue or something?
So depending upon the way, that's a divergent question. So let's say you and I enter into a contract, right? In that contract, it will typically, you're in Michigan, I'm a Delaware C Corp, you're a Nevada C Corp, right? In the course of that contractual relationship, we will determine where any litigation will be filed. That's typically done in that. But you can't file it in a state that you are not incorporated in, right? I can't say, we're going to try this in Nevada if I'm a Delaware C Corp, right? Because they're like, well, Nevada has no jurisdiction over this lawsuit, right? So it provides you the opportunity to hear litigation in a commercially friendly environment. Most lawsuits happen between individuals and companies, be they employees, be they whatever. So most corp-to-corp lawsuits solve and resolve in mediation, typically. You don't really see a lot of companies going all the way to the mat, just because it's cost prohibitive, and it's most lawsuits are really done for other reasons other than economic gain. They're done for IP protection, they're done for shaking a stick, they're done for a lot of different reasons. So finding a commercially friendly state is advisable. So, please, yes sir.
So commercially friendly means that if there was a lawsuit between an employee and a corporation, it would be in the corporation's favor.
Correct. Exactly correct. So we touched a little bit on IP. Most of the types of companies that graduate students get involved with, there is some component of IP licensing or tech transfer that is coming out for those. This is always interesting. I get this question, do you need a patent? Do you really need a patent? Do you?
Well, it depends on the field.
Sure, absolutely. Who here has a software idea? Anyone? Awesome. Do you need a patent? How many software patents have been successfully defended? Do you know? Anyone? In the history of software patents, the answer is 0. 0 software patents have gone all the way to court. 0. None. Matter of factly, the patent office is actually thinking about getting rid of software patents, right? So I think patentability really comes down to, and this is a really important thing to think of, a patent is not a shield. People think of patents as shields. It protects you from something. Patent's a sword. Patent gives you the right to go out and defend your territory, right? Gives you the right to go out and press litigation on somebody, right? It does not provide any protection. It is a sword, not a shield. Don't think of it as a shield. Think of it as a sword, okay? What about a license, right? Do you necessarily have to license your technology from a university? Don't have to, right? Depending on what your EA says. Me and 4 buddies are sitting there in a lab. We don't think the university, there's nothing out of the university we want to take. There's a great, I won't mention the name of the company, there's a company that was a software play that there was nothing specifically out of the university that was going to add any creative value to their exercise. So there's a real question there. What are we getting from the university? Now, it might be we're getting from the university a sense of entitlement, a sense of we can now use their brand to bolster what our value proposition is because it's 4 guys in a conference room, right? So there's some components of that. My recommendation is when you're looking at those license agreements, be very clear on what you're getting. Be very clear on the value that you're getting for that, right? The thing about Texas that's a little bit interesting, I've done a lot of tech transfer deals in the state of Texas. I like to say once you've done one, you've done one. They are all variant, they're different. The reason they want what they want is completely random. You go to places like, I've done them in Boston and I've done them out of Stanford and Harvard, and they have a very set sort of methodology for doing them. It's very sort of practical. And the state of Texas just doesn't seem to follow that line of practicality, I will say it. And if Bruce Butler was here, I would say it in front of him. Bruce and I have banged heads more than you can imagine. So because the juice in this case tends to be pretty expensive, you damn well better make sure it's worth the squeeze in the state of Texas. Because I promise you, if you're not conscientious, some universities will take a pound of flesh out of you. So really be super clear on what the value transfer is. Be clear about the royalties, be clear about the equity participation, be clear about what the costs of defending the patents, what the costs of all the legal components are. You need to be crystal clear aware of all the different elements that go into exercising that license, and do you want to do it? Ask yourself, do I really need this to be successful? I'm not going to go too deep in IP. I'm just going to kind of share some of my experience. You'll get a little bit that later. Are you going to bring in an IP attorney?
Maybe.
Oh, God. Definitely show up for that one. No, IP attorney's great. Tim Shin, did I tell you Tim Shin?
Yeah.
Great guy. Tim Shin defended me against Apple. I got sued by Apple, which was super fun. Actually won, and they paid me money, which was super weird. But anyway, so Tim Shin was actually my attorney. He was Apple's attorney, which was fun because when I got the lawsuit, I called Tim. I'm like, hey, will you give Apple a call? And hey, this is Tim Shin. They're like, oh my God, no. So it's great. So having the right IP attorney, I highly recommend. So here's some kind of interesting things. This is really the art of the deal when it comes to licensing technology out of institutions. I always say, when it comes to negotiating any deal, you really need to understand what sort of the drivers are. So here has been my sort of experience of what kind of the drivers are on either side of the table. So institutions, specifically, I would say definitely the ones in Texas, they have a couple goals. One is obviously sponsored research dollars, right? SRA, sponsored research agreements, right? That's how they generate money. Licensing fees, milestone payments. They might be more about the cash or less about the cash. What I find in the state of Texas, it's kind of interesting. A lot of the tech transfer offices, or the TOT offices here, have to be self-sustaining, which is kind of interesting. So the more I would say self-sustaining those tech transfer offices are, the more aggressive they tend to be with getting their equity out. So having an understanding, and you can ask them. Here's a great thing. I find just asking people and just being completely transparent with them is always the best way to do it. So just say, hey, can you tell me a little bit about the structure of your office? Like, what are your goals? Like, and I've even said, so how are you compensated? Are you bonus based upon performance? Does your cash consideration and compensation, your operating dollars come out of the cash that you generate through SRAs or through licenses, right? Understanding their drivers really helps sort of determine where you have flexibility to push and pull. And if you ask people, I think they find it terribly refreshing that you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to get to the answer. Because look, at the end of the day, there are not a lot of people to run these companies that are competent, let's say it that way. There are not a lot of people that walk in a tech transfer office and say, I am willing to take the burden of running this, license it out, raise the money, build the team, commercialize the product, and I'm going to let you basically sit on the sideline and participate in that value creation. Not that they themselves haven't created some value, but execution is the only thing that matters. There are not a lot of people that are running these offices and doing this type of stuff. So they want to make the deal work, but they have their own limitations. Some of them are state limitations. So my company right now, our technology is licensed out of the University of Texas, right? My funding source is the state of Texas. Thank you all. There are things that are just simply legislative that you cannot do. So be aware if there are simply state, federal, legislative requirements that you simply can't do these sorts of things. Don't take it personal. It's not a personal thing. It's a deal structure. Understand the driving forces behind each side. With that said, they want to build long-term relationships. This is the fourth tech transfer deal I've done out of the state of Texas. They want to build those relationships. They want to, the saying is you bet on jockeys, not on horses. They want a stable of jockeys that can ride their horses. And so they're looking for long-term relationships for iterative management teams. To this day, I'll get a call from Bruce Butler. He's like, okay, when you're done with this one, We got this other one I want you to come look at. And it's a very sort of healthy relationship to build. It's sort of a predictive model as an entrepreneur. You can kind of continue to move through these. And it's a predictive model for the licensing organizations, assuming that entrepreneur has success, they now have a really good model to take their companies and drive them to a creative value. They obviously want successful products because that's how they present their university, right? Especially now, innovation is a big thing. Have you guys seen some of the way universities are trying to change a little bit the way they present themselves? We have an entrepreneurial culture, right? You guys saw out there in the lobby, you saw AlSpark and Red Labs, right? That's Rice University and University of Houston's, I think there's some guys over here. There's some, look at those guys right there. There's some guys right there. There they are. It is a goal. It is an attempt to appeal to an entrepreneurial mindset student, right? So they are trying to shift the way they communicate the value proposition to students, because God knows the job base is soft out there. I have to tell you guys that. No litigation. Universities are notoriously shy and worried about litigation. No university wants to end up in the papers with litigation. It just looks bad. It looks bad. Also for the company. Companies want the same kind of things. We don't want to end up in litigation, right? It's not value added. You're spending resources and dollars on things that are not creating value for the product or company. You're basically in a rock fight with the people that create your intellectual property, and that's never healthy. Companies want good press. Being able to associate your brand with a large, prestigious university has value. If I license, I have my CAO. Did you guys meet Imran? Dnatrix, you guys here for Imran? Awesome. Previous last talk. So Imran's a solid guy. I love Imran. So Imran is the what's his title? Director?
Managing director.
That's ridiculous. So managing director. So Grand Poobah of Dnatrix. You guys know what Dnatrix is? Anybody MD Anderson? Right? It's a viral-based oncolytic for glioblastoma. Okay? You guys know what glioblastoma is? About a 6-month window of life. It is a terminal brain cancer. It is your ass if you get it. All right? There are not a lot of medications. There are not a lot of therapies that are effective. This is a viral-based oncolytic that it's a common cold that you literally inject in the site, and it actually reduces tumor responses in tumors. They've actually had full responders. It's pretty amazing. So you're talking about literally curing brain cancer. Brain cancer that is 100% terminal. So anyway, so my buddy licensed that out of MD Anderson, right? It's pretty cool to walk around and say, I have licensed tech out of MD Anderson. What is MD Anderson? We make cancer history. There are 2 universities and teaching hospitals in the country that are known for cancer treatment, therapeutic cancer, right? If you're in the Eastern Seaboard, where do you go? Sloan Kettering, right? If you're in Texas or you're in the Mid-Continent, you go here, right? It's pretty powerful to say, oh, well, I've licensed this technology at this university. I've got this little startup company. Oh, that's really cute. Yeah. My partner, my licensee partner is MD Anderson. Oh, it is. Different conversation, right? Gives you a little bit of girth and birth. So obviously, companies, most importantly, want the lowest price. Cheap, right? You want it cheap because cash is king. And anything you are spending to pay for your IP and licenses, you are not spending on building your company and building out your team and derivative value. So it's a very difficult thing. Again, my advice, be transparent, be honest, be engaging, sit down and solve the problem. It's a collaborative process. If you make it a collaborative process, they'll be a phenomenal partner for you. If you make it an adversarial process, they will be a nightmare and you might not get the deal done. It's a pain. So just a couple of pressure points. I like to say tech transfer is at the nexus of conflict of interest. It really is, because you've got SRAs, so you've got licensing fees coming out of one way, you've got cash flowing the other way, maybe the other way. It is a very complex thing. And conflict of interest for academics, any academics in the room? Right, is a terrifying thing, right? You have conflict checks, maybe. Your IRR, right? Your IRR board sure cares, right? The administration, right? So it's a difficult thing, right? You're sort of persistently need to make sure you have that conflict check. So it makes it complex. You need to be aware of that, Just because you, as an entrepreneur, we tend to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit fly by the seat of our pants. You have to be respectful of the process of a large institution and understand that the individuals that are involved with that have really important conflict checking they have to clear, because it can be very brand damaging and very damaging for the university itself. So, that's the thing. I talked about policy and sovereign immunity, the IP owned by the state. There are things that simply universities can't do. If it's a state-owned institution, state-owned university, this is literally the intellectual property of you guys. When I negotiate a deal with UT, you guys are the IP owners, really. taxpayers are, right? So think about it, it's kind of interesting. So taxpayers pay in a large part for these universities to exist. They build IP, and then we license it back out for a fee, even though they didn't really pay to create it. So you get into these weird sort of paradoxes, right? So a lot of the faculty members, one in the middle row back there, that actually wants to own the IP and tech, you get a lot of that. You get a lot of emotional content because people get very frustrated. These are people that are pouring their lives into this research, and it becomes a very personal thing whenever they feel like it is being commoditized. So you need to be sensitive to that. You need to be respectful of that. You need to be transparent and collaborative with that. It's a challenge. I have found tech transfer offices are very, very, very different. Individuals have different strengths and weaknesses. Again, understand their drivers, understand their motivations. Something that I mentioned early on is, with all that said, there is still the possibility for a commercial entity to circumvent the tech transfer office. You can go directly to the person that is sitting in the lab. Do I recommend it? Not always. Not always. Sometimes, but you need to understand. You got to determine, again, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are you building a negative relationship with somebody that you can derive a lot of value out of? Or are you dragging yourself and your company down by attaching this giant weight to the bow of it? It's a case-by-case basis. It's an impossibility to sit here and say what works in every case. It's always different. It's always different. So I want to talk a little bit about teams. We've talked about structure. We've talked about IP and tech transfer. I want to talk a little bit about teams. How many here are starting a company with a partner? How many people are doing it by themselves? Okay. So the typical sort of startup profile, weirdly enough, is about 1.4 people. It's about the typical, right? It's like 1.2 kids, right? So it's about 1.4 is the average, right? So most people end up doing something with the partner, and for the most human of all reasons. Very few people are supermen or women, right? Very few people have all the necessary skills that they need within themselves to accomplish every component that is necessary to be successful in a company. The plus side is, if you find yourself in this situation, you get to keep the lion's share of the equity. I will tell you from my experience, having done both, there is some real solace, and there is some real, I would say, reduction in friction and stress in your own life of having somebody else to do it with. It's like a marriage in a lot of ways. You can go your entire life without being in a relationship, but it's sure nice to come home at the end of the day and say, oh my God, I just had the shittiest day. Let me tell you what happened. And so there's something really valuable about emotionally being able to share the load and mechanically being able to share the load. Having somebody else to take responsibility and roles for certain things. I like to say, when it comes to startups, all it takes is all you've got. They tend to be very, very, very all-encompassing. And having somebody to share that burden with is a pretty healthy way to go about it. It doesn't say there aren't success stories in both camps. What I have found for my own is just it's sometimes a little bit easier to have somebody else share the burden. So let's talk about some of those roles. These are pretty obvious. So if I start a C Corp, you know what the only role that's required? What are the two roles that are required to start a C Corporation? Anybody know? President and secretary. That's it. It's weird. Yeah. So these are not things that are necessarily, I would say, mechanically required to start a C corporation. These are the things that you typically want to dole out as roles and responsibilities. These are good placeholders. So if you're going out and raising money, these are the types of activities those venture capitalists are expecting to see you have solved. The market is expecting to see you have solved as well. So these are the kind of high-level buckets that you need. Now CTO can be interchangeable with chief scientist, can be interchangeable with, what is going on? Oh man, that was going to be commit something awesome. It's chief scientist, chief architect, grand poobah, tech genius, whatever, carbon nanotube, PhD, whatever. It really comes down to sort of that science role, if you will. So it basically comes into three buckets, right? There's sort of strategic, directional, and that's sort of the responsibility of overseeing the strategic direction. That really typically falls into the CEO's category. You work with the executive team and the board to set directions. You work with your shareholders to determine inflection points for milestones. You set strategic goals. I will tell you this, it is not a sexy job. If you think it is, spend a day with me. It's terribly, terribly, terribly painful. It's just, God, if you can do anything else, do it. Don't do this, please, if you have any love for yourself. The chief operating officer or operations person, they're primarily responsible for, as Gray likes to say, his job is to keep the lights on. He is there to sort of block and tackle daily, make sure the rent gets paid, make sure salaries are done, make sure people have health insurance. It's shit I don't have to focus on, right? If I got every time I have the 1st and 15th, I had to pay attention to payroll. We have too many people to do that now, so I just can't do it. I got to do other stuff. So it's somebody that's in there sort of day to day providing the block and tackle of, I call it the really non-sexy stuff of running a company. That is incredibly essential, and if you don't focus on it, and you don't have somebody that's strong and capable at this, it will be a constant, persistent distraction. And then obviously, the tech person, they oversee the R&D. The most critical thing they do is they provide a product or solution response to a market demand. If you are a chief scientist or chief technical officer or chief whatever, and you do not wake up every day and say, how am I solving a market demand with my goods or service? You have, my friend, provided a solution to a problem that does not exist, potentially, right? So every day you should get up looking to fulfill market demand, full stop. That's it. That's all you do, right? So, am I C-suite material, right? Mark Zuckerberg, love that. This is a complicated question, and I would say this: there are very few people that you find from inception of ideation through exit, either through some type of IPO or through some type of a funds transfer event, stay through the whole thing. It is just very, very rare, because typically you find leaders come in different sort of sizes, leaders that are really good at sort of that initiation of 0 to 10 million in revenue, and then kind of 10 to 50 million. You have these sort of natural inflection points. And the reason is they're very, very, very specific skill sets. Talking to analysts and talking to public markets is very, very different than, during sort of early stage tech development, social media, blogging, getting out there and kind of rubbing in the dirt. So what I would say to you is, just because you start it doesn't mean you will finish it. And here's what I would also say to you. That's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I'll tell you why it's wonderful. Because as an early stage equity stakeholder in this company, if you're bringing in iterative leadership, that means you, hopefully, theoretically, are growing. And if you're growing, what's happening to your equity ownership? It's becoming more valuable. That's not a bad thing. So I would encourage you is to remove the emotion out of it, focus on value creation, focus on making your equity worth more, and be aware that sometimes you might not be the guy at that stage in the company to make your equity worth the most it possibly can. That freaks people out? It's okay, it shouldn't, right? Some of the things I encourage people to talk about, some people have a sense of sort of, am I too young to be a CEO? Am I too whatever? It doesn't matter. Having the presence of mind when you're raising money to look at somebody and say, look, right now, these are the roles and responsibilities that have to be done, right? There's 3 buckets, right? I suggest to people, take the interim CEO. Label yourself interim CEO if you think you need somebody to come in to take the product, goods, or services to the next level. Venture capitalists bet on jockeys, not horses, right? So they're going to look to put their team in. That doesn't mean in every case, right? If they feel like you've got the right track record or you've got a personal relationship and you've demonstrated, competency and past deals, they are willing to get behind you and do this sorts of things. I will tell you, communicating to them that you are open and aware that as an equity owner in the company and having a fiduciary responsibility to increasing the value of the pie, that you appreciate that individuals that can help participate in that they can identify, that is such a maturity that they don't see most of the time. It will give you tremendous credibility when you're raising money. Tremendous credibility, truly. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm the CEO, I've got my CEO, I've got my CIO, right? That's maybe not enough people to do everything I want to do. So let's talk a little bit about hiring talent. So I always like to say, when I hire talent, There's a great article that Steve Jobs wrote. It's kind of interesting. And they were talking about, they asked him flat out, they said, what do you see your most important role is? And without hesitation, he said, my most important role is to identify, attract, and retain the very best people on the planet. Full stop. Full stop. Because companies are made of people. And if I can find the smartest people in the world and bring them to this company and clear the runway for them to be amazing and successful, I'm going to build one hell of a company. And crossed $1 trillion in his P&E, I would argue he was right. Not that Tim Cook hasn't done a really great job, but anyway. So I would say that is, as a CEO, as a founder of a company, is your primary responsibility. Identify, attract, and retain the very smartest people you can, right? So what do I do? How do I determine that? Well, first I start with what are gaps? What are my gaps in my organization? And it's a very know thyself exercise. I am a good engineer. I suck at sales. I'm horrible. I just don't like doing it. I have to do it, so I do it. But I'm not as good as I should be, I think, in my own opinion. So I look for people that are really strong in that area. And I mean the sales, like picking up the phone and following up, all that kind of stuff. I'm good at marketing. I will tell you about how great we are all the time. But sales, I'm not really great. That's sort of block and tackle, CRM, follow-up stuff. I'm not. So I look to bring in folks like that. That's my gap, you know. It's a know thyself moment. I know what I'm not good at. You know, when you're looking at talent, everything has a price, right? You got to ask yourself, what can I afford, right? There are capable individuals that haven't proven themselves in the marketplace that are just smart, horsepower, energetic people, and they bring a lot of value. They're going to require more of your time to set direction, to participate with them. They're just going to need more governance and direction. And then there's the highly experienced executive. He needs a hell of a lot less direction. He's also very, very expensive, right? So what you have to ask yourself is that, again, the gap I have filled by what person will meet my goals in what time frame, right? And if you can do that with a less expensive, younger resource, great. Somebody you can train up, you can build, that's wonderful. If you need that accelerant, all money does is buy you speed. That's all it does. It's an accelerant. That's all it does, right? So applying that to accelerate your business, to get you through some commercial window, to get you to some milestone, which will bring in new customers or bring in additional money or open up a new sales channel, whatever it is, right? That's what money buys you. And that's what that experience buys you. It buys you a Rolodex. It buys you, you know, having sort of BTDT, been there, done that. That's what it buys you, right? Plain and simple. The thing I like to say to people is, and this is really harsh when I say it out loud, but it's true. Probably, and I apologize if anybody in here currently finds themselves unemployed, if you are looking to hire somebody that is the latest, greatest, super thing, they probably are working for somebody right now. I very rarely find the very, very best in the industry unemployed. They don't. They don't sit long. Engineers are especially true. I mean, a really, really good engineer, yeah, no. He's not in this city. That guy's gone. He's on the street, he's gone, 2 days. Very rarely do those guys, you know. So I would encourage you to be aware that you're probably going to have to create enough of a value proposition to encourage that person to leave a job. Because the kind of people you probably want are probably not sitting at home playing Xbox. Probably, right? So you need to create a value proposition that makes them feel like they should take the risk on you. Now, what is that value proposition? That's on you guys. I don't know. You know, I can tell you, this is my favorite story. So Microsoft, when they started, when they would hire engineers, I went to school in Boston. So they do this all the time. They'd come on campus. They come on campus at MIT and Harvard. And they always say, you can go work at this was during the startup crazy time. I know, I'm not that old. So this is during like the crazy startup time where, you know, people were working like pets.com and crazy shit, like weird stuff. And Microsoft would come on and they would say, so here's the deal. Absolutely, you can work at pets.com and you can, you know, hang out and wear Birkenstocks and bring your pet to work and you get like 10% off dog food and whatever else. And that's pretty awesome. And you'll build a website and, you know, I don't know, a couple million people will see it. Or you can come to Microsoft and you can work on Microsoft Office. And your code will be seen by hundreds of millions of people, if not billions. It's a pretty effective marketing tool. So that was how Microsoft used to pitch people on coming in and be an engineer for them. So you got to determine what that thing is that will excite people. So in my company, we're the first FDA cleared clinical decision support product on the planet, full stop. Full stop. There is nothing else that received FDA clearance like we did. Engineers love that shit because they're now getting ready to, they're getting ready to be a part of a team for something that's never been done before. That appeals to a certain kind of person, right? Not everybody, but a certain kind of person. That's my value proposition. I go to engineers and I say, I'm an engineer. I run this company like an engineer. As an engineer, I respect what it takes to be an engineer. I'm not going to create unrealistic goals. I'm not going to put shit on you that is impossible. I'm going to call bullshit on you because I know what I'm doing. But you're going to come do something that's never been done before. And engineers love that shit. They love it. And you're going to get to do it with really, really, really smart people. Not me, but other smart people, right? People that work there, people I've hired. Again, identify, attract, or attain the smartest people you know. I like to say hire for skill, not title. People get so hung up on that. They're like, okay, we want to hire a CIO. So let's go to the marketplace and we're going to find a CIO. And I'm like, what if you find a director of tech that is maybe looking to make that next step in their career, right? Maybe you just find a guy that's just below that guy that would be perfect for your company, right? So don't get so hung up on, oh shit, he's not a CTO, we want a CTO, we can't hire a guy that's not a CTO to come be our CTO. Don't get hung up on that stuff. So how soon should you hire? This is very, very easy to answer. When you have a problem and you can afford to solve it, it's an expense. It is no longer a problem. I recommend to all of you, do not turn your expenses into problems because it is an asinine way to run a company. If you have the economic capability to turn your problems into expenses, you'll be much happier as a CEO, okay? How much do I pay? That comes down to a simple thing. How bad do you need it? How bad do you want them? How much are you gonna have to pay them to go away from their current job? Most people will say, I want to be made par, right? I want to be brought over for what I'm making. I don't know. Can you make an argument for a more compelling job? Can you bring them over with stock options? Maybe it's, pantsless Thursdays. You never know what motivates people, right? You got to kind of find that thing. So, you got to kind of figure that out. So, the economics of how much, you can go and do salary surveys. I have found that those are baselines to help you make sure that you're not, high on drugs and that you're at least in the remote ballpark of what somebody should be compensated for that act and job. They are very of limited value when it comes to actually negotiating a deal with an individual. Because it really, really, really comes down to how bad you need it and how much you can convince them that what you are doing is exciting. Because the more it becomes an interesting lifestyle choice for them, the less equity, the less cash you have to give up, right? Which backfired in Zappos, but still kind of cool. I asked for a different unicorn photo, but it looks like we got this one in here. So this is something I hear all the time, and it's never going to happen. Much like unicorns, the idea of the unicorn CEO, the independently wealthy, intellectually engaged guy that's just going to come in and run your company. And he's going to do it for hardly anything, and that is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. If you're waiting for that guy, it's never going to happen. It's not. Having a guy that is going to come in and raise his own salary and it's very, very rare. It's a very, very rare thing. So, just doesn't exist. So I see that a lot. I see a lot of entrepreneurs that say, we're going to build this great idea, and then we're going to find that industry leader, and he's going to come in and be the CEO and raise all the money and do all this stuff, and yay, and they build that plan. And that is not real. Does not happen. So again, be open to the idea of carrying out the roles, being the interim, having the maturity of saying, I am the interim X. So as you're going to the markets and you're building out that value proposition, you're trying to raise capital to bring in the type of talent you're going to need to take you to the next level. But this guy, this is not real. So how do I find these amazing, wonderful people? For those of you at Allspark and Red Labs, you've heard me talk about this. We did a whole thing on individuals and teams. Somebody have a question? Sorry. No? Cool. I always tell people the very, very best place to start is your own personal network. Ask yourself this: who is the smartest woman or man that I know? Right? Everybody right now is thinking, I know a guy. Maybe they're sitting next to you. Maybe you already hired him for your company. The very best way to build out an organization is start with the smartest people you know, and then ask them who the smartest people they know are. That's the great start of a group, right? They're pre-vetted. Probably know them in social context, so you have a little bit of understanding about how you're going to work with them, right? You know, they provide other smart people like to hang out with smart people. Bless you, right? Maybe you go to trivia. I met a lot of my engineering buddies at trivia, which is super weird. So there's this math trivia thing. I'm not going to share that with you because it gets personally embarrassing really fast. Anyway, so you just meet a lot of really cool people that way, right? You meet people that have shared interests and then have intellectual prowess, and that's really early on what you're looking for. Because this stuff's hard, and you're going to need to find somebody that you can get along with and not want to choke every day. So start with people that you know, people that you find to be very capable, and then ask them who they find to be capable. That doesn't scale forever, but it gets you a long way down the road. Then once you have the funding from your venture capitalist, now you can start to tap into their Rolodex. They're going to have jockeys that they're used to working with. They're going to make recommendations based upon performing companies that they've exited and individuals that they maybe have on their bench and stuff like that. So the venture capitalists have an entire paradigm, which are these sort of, they call it entrepreneurs in residence. People have heard of that, right? So they're literally entrepreneurs that work with big venture capital firms that sort of go in and then kind of, you know, they kind of like have an exit, and the venture capitalists go, well, okay, wait, don't leave. We'll find something else for you to do. So they keep them on, they have them vet deals and stuff like that. It's a pretty good gig. I did it for a while for Draper Fisher Jefferson out in Menlo Park. It was fun. You get to send out a lot of boards and, you know, fly around a lot, but you don't get to do a lot of operational stuff, so it gets boring pretty quick. But it's a great way to sort of transition for an entrepreneur. It's a great way to seek talent if you're a startup and you're fortunate enough to be funded by that group. It's a great way to sort of grow out. But I would say start with the people you know and depend on the people that you think are just smart badasses, and then ask them who they think are smart badasses. Another one is meetups. So, you know, this is pretty interesting. If you raise your hand and say you're an expert, people will follow you. It's terrifying, but it's true. So I have a buddy of mine who's an engineer. He's one of my lead engineers. He actually runs Pi Texas. You guys know what Pi is? Python. I'm terrified. Okay, there we go. Some engineers in the background. You know, so it's a development language. It's just an OOD development language. Anyway, so he was like, he worked for Alert Logic. You guys know who Alert Logic is? Really successful company in Texas, right? So he was one of the lead engineers at Alert Logic. He's now one of my lead engineers. He started a Pi Texas meetup group because he was trying to find more Python developers for his company, Alert Logic. And he said, what if I just start a meetup group and say, hey, if you're into Python, why don't you come out and have a beer and we'll all share stories and we'll all talk. Well, that turned into this massive thing. And now he holds these mega meetups in College Station, on College Station campus. And seriously, it's like 3,000 engineers show up. What a cool way to meet cool people, right? And so what we do now is we always speak at these things, we sponsor them. So we'll go and talk at them, and then we'll go listen to other lectures. And you can find really smart people that way. And then we approach them and go, hey, what are you doing right now? Hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm working this company, it's kind of okay, but you know, I'm not really sure. Oh, really? Let me show you what we're doing. You seem like a cool guy. Next thing you know, you got your new QA QC guy, right? So meetups are pretty valuable. You guys are all here, right? So you're trying to build your own networks. These are great events, right? I tell people, have very realistic expectations. You know, Houston is not San Francisco, and that's okay. I don't apologize for that. Houston has a lot of wonderful things for it. But we have to be aware that we do not have as diverse and rich of a startup environment, and consequently as diverse and as rich as a startup entrepreneur as you might find in other places, right? So be very honest and realistic with yourself. With that also said, it is hella hard to get somebody to move from the Bay Area to Houston, Texas. Who here is from California right now, right? Who here that is from California is going to stay in Houston after this? Where are all my hands? What the hell is happening? This town's awesome. I grew up in San Diego. There's nothing wrong with Houston. Arrogant bastards. So, California, man. Land of fruits and nuts. There you go. There's one in the back. Yeah, how's that state income tax? Is that good? Awesome. So you have to be realistic about what is available to you and what people will really do, right? So, we'll just find some guys in California. We'll get them to move here. Probably not going to happen. And then find these sort of like diehard core guys just kind of knowing the industry. The thing I love about Houston is such a small town. Like we all know each other. So it was hilarious. So I mean, when Joanna and I were talking, and Will and I were talking, I was like, we were kind of like, kind of local resources. And I'm like, well, like Michael Blaney. She's like, yeah, like Michael Blaney. He's kind of like who everybody uses to basically do all their incorporation papers and negotiate their license. He's an ex-Vincent Elkin partner, Vianney or Fulbright? Vianney?
Yeah.
Vianney?
Yeah.
So this is a guy that used to literally bill $1,000 an hour as a partner and decided that I don't need to bill all that because I don't really need all the staff. So I can go out on my own, bill half of that, and help out startups and make the exact same money. And that's what he did. So if you talk to most people, how many people do you know use Michael Blaney to start their company?
Probably 8 startups.
Yeah,
At least.
right. So there's always, did you guys use them? There you go, right? So, so you did the right thing. Good choice. So there are people that are sort of, in the know. Tim Chen is an IP guy. He's a startup IP guy. I've used him for a ton of stuff. They're just guys and guys and gals in the network that are just kind of known as these entrepreneurial startup kind of people. So look for those kind of individuals. They tend to come to events like this, ask other startups, ask them, well, who did you use to do your incorporation? If you hear Michael Blaney 4 times, well, maybe you should call him, right? Just take a lot of thinking there. So let's talk about possibly the most painful conversation you will ever have in your entire life with somebody you are related to, is your friend, is your lab partner, is your co-conspirator, is your co-author, is the equity split. How many people have had this conversation already about their company? No. How many people are avoiding it? There you go. Good for you. How many people are avoiding it? No? You guys, okay, that's good. It's a difficult conversation. Again, what I always tell people is should not be an emotional conversation. It should really be predicated on the derived value, what you're bringing to the table in the most unemotional possible way you can. There's a guy that lectures at Kellogg, and he does this great lecture on equity division. And he gives a story of Zipcar. You guys familiar with Zipcar? Yeah, so kind of cool company. So when Zipcar was founded, there were 2 founders. They were both expats from London. Their husbands were working in London, I think. They were in London. They saw this car sharing program. They got really excited about it. They came back to the States, and they said, man, that's something that seems like it would work here, right? So why don't we start that? And they said, okay, let's do it. And it was 2 women, and they sat at the table, and they said, well, look, so it's not odd. We get this out of the way, the awkward conversation. Let's split it 50-50, right? Seems logical, right? So what happened? One of them went on to be the face of the company, carried all the water, did all the work, quit their job, completely got invested in it. The other did none of those things. Still on the exact same amount of equity. Is that fair? Probably not, right? 76% of all companies determine their equity pool at that stage. 76. Maybe maybe you already are aware of the contributions. Here's what I will tell you. You need to be painfully aware at your own peril of what the individual is going to bring to the company going forward. Not because you guys hung out and, hey, he was there and that's great, right? If you're going to quit your job and he's going to hang out at Schlumberger and work all day or wherever, it seems like a different contribution. Just giving him shit. The other twin here? There he is! Yes! Zing! Got him. Hey, did you make it back from Schlumberger okay? Good, awesome. One of the twins. So you need to be aware about that. It's value driven. You need to be aware about the value that has been created and the value that will be created in the future. Equity it's like any other compensation. It's like cash. It's like healthcare. It's consideration for work done, right? Founder versus employee. Not every founder has to be an employee, right? I have 3 clinical founders that are surgeons, that are doctors and professors, and they do not have an operating role at my company. They receive founder shares for the value they created, which was tremendous. They do not receive shares going forward because they're not going to work there. And how would I do milestones for that? How would you create milestones for something that's not going to work there, right? You can't create milestones. You can't create 4-year vesting schedules for somebody that has no milestones. How are you going to do that? So divide it up into founders and employees. Founders to me are about the ideation, the contribution, the licensing, the intellectual property, right? Those are founder shares. Employee shares are execution shares. They're for building the company. They're for executing on the vision. They're for creating corporate value. Founders, mostly sweat equity, a lot of it, right? You hear the term sweat equity. A lot of that comes from founders. Some of it may be because they sit on patents, maybe because you need them because they're a big name in something. One of my guys is Dr. John Holcomb. He's like a rock star in the world of emergency medicine. So absolutely, I want John in a big share. I want him really fat with my equity, right? Because every time John talks to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, I want him to mention my lowly little company that he owns a lot of, right? It's not a bad thing, right? One of the most important things I can tell you about dividing up equity is you will divide it up one time. When you do, let it go. Don't talk about, think about, worry about what you got and what somebody else got. Once you have it, your job is simple. Make the value of it greater. Okay? A slice of pie and a 10 centimeter pie is negligible compared to a slice of pie and a 100 centimeter pie. Make the pie bigger. That's your job. Increase its value. Don't bitch about, oh, I got one slice, you got two. Too late. Missed it.
Quick question.
Please.
The example that you gave, you just did car 50-50
Yep.
partnership.
Yep.
What do you think would have been more ideal?
For me, I think they did it too soon. I think the lesson there is until you have clear understanding and articulating what each person is going to bring to the commercial entity, it is too soon to determine and divide out value. Right? Two people sitting at a coffee table having a conversation, it's too soon to have that conversation. I think the conversation should have been something like this. It should have been, so here's what I'm prepared to do. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to take over as head of marketing. I have these relationships at these car manufacturers. I'm going to reach out to them and see if I can't get preferred pricing and fleet pricing from those cars, right? These are my action-oriented items. What are you going to do? And when you get, I like blue, you're like, maybe that's not a 50% equity holder. So I would say in that case, the lesson there is it was too soon to determine that. Again, there was not enough clarity and optics on value, right? There was, what is the value? Well, we're buddies and we just divide it in half. Right? You got to understand what the person brings to the table, right? So I think that's the lesson there.
So how much do you think that just the idea, coming up with the idea for the person who didn't put in as much effort?
To me, and this is sort of the general consensus, ideas are of very little value. Execution is everything. There are a ton of ideas, probably many floating around in this room.
The activity at the end,
Yeah, we'll get to, this will be, you're going to kill my thunder.
Don't give the answer.
Just shh. They're not. I mean, the reality of it is it's all about execution. Most of these things fail, right? Most of them fail because of execution, not because of ideation, right? You guys remember VHS, Betamax? Anybody old like me in here, right? Who won? Why? Was it a better format? No. Better marketing, execution. Wasn't the idea, wasn't the technology. They lost.
HD and Blu-ray.
HD and Blu-ray, thank you. I never remember it was HD, right? HD and Blu-ray. HD, superior compressed format. Better technology, lost. Why? Execution. What are ideas worth? Yes, sir.
You're speaking about a lot of people with different kind of company ideas, different kind of entrepreneurial ideas. Are there some good questions that are a litmus test for when that valuation, that sort of equation should be discussed? Because you've got to get people engaged,
Absolutely motivated. Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
there's some commitment there before that.
Absolutely. So there's external factors that sort of will sort of be natural points. So for example, if you're going to license something from a university, right, you need to have that conversation sooner than later. So that's kind of a self-imposed external force kind of thing. But really a lot of it comes down to that value conversation that really, to me, I think it's a great conversation to have sooner than later, but it has to be predicated on value. The conversation needs to have, you're right, you need to motivate people to leave their job and come do this stuff. You also need to know that if they're not going to come leave their job and do this stuff, that they shouldn't end up with 50% of the company. So I think it's just a question of, and what the order of operation of the conversations. People start with, well, we did this together, so let's do 50-50. What they should start with is, hey, here's what I'm going to bring to the table and focus on. What are you going to bring to the table and focus on? That's the first conversation that needs to occur. right? We tend to split, it's a weird thing. We tend to want to split the pie first. You know, maybe it makes us comfortable. Maybe we feel like that's the elephant in the room. We're like, oh, once we get it all divided up, then we'll all be on the same page. The right thing to do is to focus on what people are going to do for that equity and then determine its value. And we're going to do a little exercise here in a second. I think you guys will all find very interesting, intriguing. So we talked about that, founder value. Move back down here. So founder value, you know, technology expertise. You know, it's pretty simple. If you've got one guy that has all the secret sauce, owns all the patents, and pretty much, you know, is your Wozniak, you're going to make sure that guy's pretty well compensated, right? Business acumen, execution, right? If you have somebody that is able to execute and increase the size of that pie, they're going to be able to ask for a lot of value, right? Network. What's the hardest thing for a startup company to do? Sell a damn product. The first one. My God, is that hard? Anybody trying to do that right now? How hard is that? Shit. It's brutal, right? Right? You're a couple guys. It's a cool idea. You're trying to educate a market on who the hell you are. You've got no reason to buy from you. Why you versus somebody else? It's brutal, right? So having somebody that can crack that nut with a network. Oh, I know a guy. I got this buddy Bob. He runs Hitachi. He'll buy 20 of these, right? Just to try them out. That's awesome. My company. So I have a pretty good network. My buddy ran Beacon Partners. This is all true story. Beacon was acquired by KPMG. KPMG, you guys heard of them? Big Four accounting company. They're a pretty big company. I'm flying up next week to Chicago to sit down with KPMG to talk about what they call their accelerant something program. I don't know. Maybe I should learn that before I go up there. That came through a friend of mine, Paul Sinclair. I've known Paul forever, right? I am now sitting down with a small company talking to KPMG about them being my distribution arm. They talk to the C-suite from an audit perspective, pretty much every major hospital and every major system on the planet. That guy can accelerate me instantaneously. He can put me in more hospitals than I can deliver on, frankly, right? One phone call. That network built up over 20 years. It's a powerful, very valuable thing. So don't ever discount what that's worth. Any questions? No? Still cruising? So we talked a little about vesting earlier. Vesting doesn't exist for founders, people that are not employees. You can't put a vesting schedule on people that are not going to work for you because how in the hell would you create milestones, right? You're a founder. You're not an employee. Here are your shares. Go with God. Thank you for your contribution, right? You're an employee. Equity for employees is for what they are going to do. Equity for founders is for what they have done. Different things, right? Think of equity as any other form of compensation. Cash. It is. It's what it is, right? It's compensation. It's not an emotional thing. So let's talk a little bit about equity by role, right? There's basically three buckets. There's the founder, right? We talked about the idea person. They get to participate immediately. And it's fair when you think about it, right? They've been toiling away in their lab, or they've been toiling away with this idea, right? That is consideration for what they have done, regardless of the commercial success of the company, the effort they put in today. They don't have milestones because they're not employees. How do you do that? So they don't vest, right? You have the founder for employee. I have 3 people that were part of the original engineering team that came over with the company. They received both founder shares and they're going to receive employee shares. The founder shares for what they did. The option pool and participation in that has a 4-year vesting cliff. That will be for what they're going to do. Is milestone based upon hitting metrics, right? And then there's a pure employee, right? Everybody else I've hired. They weren't there at the foundation of the company, so they're not a founder, so they didn't receive shares for what the ideation was. They're receiving shares purely for what they do in the company going forward. I like to say a good rule of thumb, an option pool somewhere between 10 and 20% is what you're going to need through the various, sort of liquidation rounds as you go through your series. It's good to have about an option pool about 10 to 20%. That's about kind of what industry average turns out. Some of these things are just interesting. They're just heuristics. You kind of find like that. I've spent so many times going through really complicated models, and I always end up coming back to the exact same number. And you're like, well, that was worth all the effort. Turns out 10 to 20% is about the right number, right? So let's play a game. You guys want to play a game? Thermal nuclear war? Would you like to play a game? Just two young kids. They don't understand. Exactly. All right, so each row has a board. Is that right? So let's play a game. There's 3 buckets. The idea, the execution, and the money. I'm going to give you a company. This company is called Decision Health.
Oh.
What are you laughing at? What's wrong with you? Thank you very much. Decision Health is run by an amazing CEO. Decision Health is a health IT software company. It was licensed out of university, so there is a tech transfer fee to pay. It is raising money, and it has a healthy group of about 15 FTEs. I want you guys, row by row, to determine a role, and I want you to put into buckets with your role what you're going to give each of those in terms of equity.
Is it
okay?
clear what those buckets mean?
That's for the idea, that's for building the company, that's for the guys that keep the lights on. Right? Do you feel like it was ambiguous? Wait till you're doing it for real. There is no right answer. It's hard. It's your narrative, right? Whose board is this? Great. So I'm assuming in this instance you have a founder, CEO, that person's going to go over and work with the execution team. Is that what I'm thinking? Great. So what is that? I'm sorry, I can't read this. Does that say?
Round 2.
Sorry again, pardon me?
Round 1 and round 2.
Round 1 and 2. What is this?
35.
Right?
35.
Right. What's your valuation? What's your valuation?
We don't know, but we expected
What's your company value?
that we would lose a lot when we bring money in.
Here's what I recommend. Figure out what your post-money valuation is going to be before you start determining what the equity pool is going to be, right? What am I worth? What for what? Right? Now, I'm not saying you're going to get it. Probably won't. Right? But you at least need to have a target, right? And start building to that exercise and that argument. So 10% split. Sorry, what does this say? I'm sorry, I'm not.
Do you want to just each present your
Yeah,
board and then
please.
we'll let Brian criticize you?
I'm not going to criticize you.
Constructive criticism.
Absolutely.
We have 10% equity for the current full-time employees. We have a pool of 5% for new hires, and we have 10% for the C-suite
Okay.
executives.
Gotcha. 4-year vesting cliff, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Awesome. So what did you find the hardest part of this? Where was there disagreement and discourse?
We were just trying to balance the whole thing to 100%.
Right.
The money was a black box, but was the valuation. We didn't know what the product was.
Perfect. Yeah, right. That's okay, right? It's interesting, right? A lot of people do it as a math exercise. It's not necessarily not wrong, right? You see a lot of this, right? A lot of the equity distribution comes down to, well, let's start with 100%. Let's start cutting out pies that way, right? It is. There's a component of it, right? So this founder, CEO, you have another founder that's going to stay here. They end up with 10%. What does that say?
University.
What is that?
Licensing, 5%.
5% for the university, huh? How many people think they can give 5% to the university? Man, that's awesome. Will you come negotiate my licensing deals? That'd be awesome. So this is actually 5 flats, a pretty common thing in the West Coast and the East Coast. Stanford does a flat 5, right? They actually do, it's kind of cool. Actually, now Stanford has no equity. How cool is that, right? You guys wish you worked at Stanford now, don't you? That's pretty awesome. So seriously, Stanford has no equity. So Stanford has a really, really interesting idea because they've had a lot of winners. Stanford's realized that this elevates their brand. It makes smart guys like professors want to come be there, the very, very best and brightest. Because if they can license their IP out with no cost and clawback to the university, it's pretty amazing, right? Would that be exciting to you if you could go and build whatever you, right? It's awesome, right? It's exciting to money because now they don't feel like they get this drag that's going to university, right? And it's also pretty great because what they found out after the great Google experiment was this. You know what percentage of Google's endowment, Stanford's endowment now is made up of Google dollars? A shit ton. So it turns out, if you bring in smart people through your amazing brand, they roll out amazing commercial technology, they tend to pay it back. Interesting, right? Right? So, definitely the West Coast, right? Definitely the West Coast. So a couple lessons here. One, you're right, a little bit of a black box. You're gonna have to go through the exercise of arguing what you want for what. A lot of that comes down to making sure that you don't give so much away that you lose complete control if you're able to do it, right? Setting a target enables you to start making an argument for value. I just had somebody come up and tell me what they wanted to raise as a free money. Where did you go? He's hiding now. Where's his hand? He's hiding now. He's been gone. There's a value in that because he said, look, that's past that I lose control, right? So he's got a mind. There he is. Yeah, past that I lose control, right? So you've got a target in mind, right? You've got a driver in mind, right? Now what are you going to do? You're going to make a case for why you should be that, right? So if you can't start with a target, you sure as hell can't make a case. Because at the end of the day, I'm telling you, venture capitalists are terrifyingly acute at cutting you into little bitty ribbons when it comes to this stuff. So you better be very, very acute when you determine what your value is, and you better have a really succinct argument on how you got there. Right? How about these guys over here? Don't be shy. Dustin, you know I'm going to pick on you because I know your name.
All right, let's do it.
Let's do it, Dustin.
All right, so we gave 15% to founders, assuming there was 2 surgical founders.
Look at you.
And so there'd be a milestone cap. They can get up to 10%. Right now they're split in 15, so 7.5 each. Based on milestones, if they help out, get us into a few more hospitals, they can get up to 10% each. But at the end of the day, they're going back to their surgical day jobs while everybody else is executing. 10% would be great for them to have, just for being the idea, guys. We save 40% for execution. So your CEO, CTO with a team of engineers, COO might have some accountants and finance guys under him. 25% for vested options for early hires, and then 20% for high potential employees that you find out that you need. The problem that one guy can solve, you don't have to have that guy yet. Save 20% for those.
Okay. Nothing for the tech transfer? You guys screw those guys?
Well, yeah.
There's their answer.
Yeah, we didn't think of tech transfer. We'll probably just take 2 off of execution and 1 off of founder, and we can just split up 5%.
So here's what's interesting about tech transfer offers. There's 2 ways to do it, and I've done them both, and they're equally horrible. The first way you can do it is you can literally go to the Office of Tech Transfer, and you can negotiate the deal with them. The IP is not owned by the founders. You will probably get a better deal because now the equity that pays the founders comes out of the equity you negotiate with the tech transfer office. You will probably alienate and piss off the founders, right? The other way is you go to the founders and you negotiate with the founders, right? But you still have this tech transfer office you got to satisfy over here because the tech transfer office says, well, wait a minute, that's our intellectual property, right? I'm glad you gave them, that's your problem. Here's what I need, right? Now, you create really, really, really a goodwill with the founders. It's tough on the equity pool table, right? So you got to really understand that you need those founders engaged, right? Please.
And you might further suggest that knowing the university's policies in this sense, sometimes there's a hardline policy on the question. So you don't, the founder may not even know the policies.
Exactly
so
correct.
You may, engender some of their goodwill, but at the end of the day, you know when you go to the tech transfer people, this is the number.
You got it. You're exactly correct. And they really, it's interesting, they're, depending upon the university, the specific state owner, are famous for this. There's just such rigidity. Like nobody, until you get to the state congress, can actually determine any of this stuff. Right? So each person goes, well, not me. This is what I got to have. And that guy says, well, that's what I got to have. And that guy says, that's what I got to have. And I guess you knock on Rick Perry's door and maybe he can answer the question. Right? It's very interesting sort of this, but you're exactly right. What I would encourage you to do is engage your tech transfer office. I think it is, if you ever imagine yourself in a situation, and you should as a researcher, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you think you might commercialize something out of your entity, take the time to go speak to the tech transfer office. Right? Know what you're getting into. Those lines are really important to know. You're exactly correct. And here's the other thing, be iterative about it because it changes all the time. Policy changes all the time. It's a very, very big situation. So quick question. At the end of, let's say, Series A, Series B, Series C exit, what does the average CEO end up with in terms of equity when they leave the company? Anybody know? Total, all in, out the door. Somewhere between 3 and 5%. How many people thought they were going to leave with more than that? Right, isn't that a bummer? 3 to 5%. About. Right. CTOs, somewhere about 1 to 0.5%. CEOs, somewhere between 1 and 3%. Right, it's a pretty industry average, right? So be aware. It's, you kind of, well, yeah, everybody, CEOs tend to think in terms of 10%. It's a nice round number. We think in 10%. A lot of CEOs do, good figure. A lot of CEOs go, 8, 10%. It's an anomaly. It doesn't really happen. If you're a higher CEO, maybe 5% when you're done. You get through all the series. It's just kind of the way it turns out.
Please. Wait, I have a question, Brian, actually. Earlier we were talking about founders might not be the guy, he might not be CEO
Right.
for this different series of raising money or whatever, at different stages of the company. But if you are a founder, what can you do to, let's say that you end up having to hire a CEO to go public because you don't know anything about that. And you have to give him significant equity because he's a genius, she's a genius. How do are you just getting diluted and there's nothing you can do about it? Is
Yeah,
that
that's
to
it.
protect yourself?
I mean, that's the thing. You have to make, again, the juice has to be worth the squeeze. Again, stop focusing on your piece of the pie and start focusing on the size of the pie. If you make that decision and it doesn't increase, if you make that decision and your equity isn't worth more, do not make that decision. That is not the right decision. Right? You should naturally want to make that call. You should want to give up that equity because it makes yours worth more. Right? So, any questions? Yes, sir.
That percentage that you said, was that referring to a hired CEO rather than someone who was a founder?
So yeah, so you have anomaly things like the Marks and the world that kind of ran it through all the way up and reinvested, but disproportionately the people that are brought in as CEOs make about 5% typically. You guys want to be CEOs now? Whose is this?
That's on the top.
Got it. What did you guys find the hardest part? Agreeing? You guys don't know each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun, right?
Figuring out who was what.
Right. Right. It's hard, right? That's why being mechanical about it and focusing on value really codifies the argument in conversation. It takes it from an emotion. None of you guys know each other. So none of you know what each is going to contribute to this organization, right? So in some ways, you're making the exact kind of decision as two women that sat at that table that barely knew each other and carved up a $1 billion company between two people.
What we talked about most is the evaluation of the company, so that's hard to figure out what the main people are going to get.
Absolutely. How many people think when they walk in, they're going to have agreement with the valuation of the company will sit on the venture capitals? Right. Doesn't happen. What feeds into your valuation? Who knows? Right? I can tell you what is the number one thing that will increase your valuation. Sales. You said it. Exactly. Commercial penetration. You want to increase the value of your company? Sell something. It is the only thing that you can, as an early stage startup company, hang your hat on. But our idea is better. Our people are smarter. To be determined. We sold this many units. Hard to argue that. Right? Hard numbers. Please.
What about all these tech companies getting $1 billion valuations without any revenue yet?
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Oh, yeah.
What are they worth?
I don't know.
Right? What's Twitter worth?
I don't know. That's the exact company I was thinking.
Right? Yeah, so I used to work with a company called Living.com. You guys heard of it? No. Yeah, we had no revenue, raised $200 million. You know why you haven't heard of it? It doesn't exist anymore. So let's wait a while and see how they do.
No, but in life science, that's the way it worked. I mean, the valuation is based on phase 2 sometimes, and phase 2 is just a company that was sold today for 6 or 7 billion on the phase 3 partial data.
Yeah.
For an asset.
Yep. It's a very interesting thing what drives venture capitalists.
Is there a bubble right now, you think, in venture capitalists?
This exact conversation today. I think there are a lot of funds that are sitting on a fair amount of cash right now, and there are certain industries where they are weak in their portfolio, and they're looking to make investments in those areas. With that said, I would say that the last 20 years were a pretty good lesson for those folks. And so they're torn between needing hard data on the market dynamics of what the opportunity for that company is, with the need to put that money to work in an area where they might not have any investments. So it is interesting. I would say in healthcare IT, there is definitely a certain amount of fervor that's out there in the market. And if you guys have are you having an IB guy come in like Chris McCord or something like that? Chris would be awesome. So if Chris were here, Chris would be, you guys know Chris McCord? You know Chris McCord? Yep. Growth Partners? Should know him. He's a solid guy. I'm one of my best friends in the world. Chris would tell you there are things that are going on in the marketplace right now because people are trying to diversify into areas because of the sizes of the raises they've done. So venture capital companies that are now managing $300 and $400 million funds, and private equity companies that are running out of things to put money into, there's this weird convergence. where you got P&E firms and VC firms for the first time fighting over the same companies. And they use very, very different metrics to decide how they invest. And so it's very difficult right now for companies to know how to sort of pitch that. And they're all different. And that would be the one thing I would tell you. Know who you're pitching to and know what their drivers are. You got an introduction, most probably if you're sitting down with a venture capital company, right? Ask that introduction the next and most important question. What are their drivers? Why are they interested in me? Where are they emphasizing on? How much power do they have left to put in, right? You need to ask the dynamics, the questions of what do they invest in and why? Because it's always different. It's always bizarre. So I would say in some funds there is a certain sense of urgency. Merck, you guys know Merck GHI? You guys were here, Merck GHI. So I got a weird thing. So we're this tiny little company, we don't matter. And I got a LinkedIn request from somebody from Merck GHI. And I was like, this cannot be Merck Pharmaceuticals. I'm in health IT, that makes no sense. So I responded because you respond to everything. And I was like, no, I said, so I wrote, the Merck, ? And I got back, yes. And they said, we would like to come to Texas and talk to you. And I said, that is an impossibility. But we'll be happy. You guys do drug. We're not a drug. It's not, So they came down and they have built a $750 million fund specifically to flatten out their revenue in the pharmacy market. So they're looking to put money into things that have a bit less of a fluctuating revenue coming to it. So they're coming. They came to Houston. You guys remember anybody to go to that? So they came to Rice University. They sat down a bunch of companies. They presented what the Merck GHI fund was, and there's just mouths dropped all over the place. Who the hell knew that Merck had a $700 million early stage venture fund run by 3 people? Crazy, right? Then they put another $1 billion into it for pure M&A. So 1.75 to run around 5 or something, right? Hitachi right now.
This is most of the pharma market though. The last 10 years, they've completely shrank their R&D.
You got it.
And they're just basically allowing academics or others to go on and do risk.
You guys are risking. Exactly right. Exactly right. What's weird is none of the assets in the GHI fund are going towards fund deals. I'm like, how the hell are you going to put 1.75 billion to work with 3 people in health IT? Oh, crap. So that creates an interesting paradigm for them, right? Because they got a lot of money, a few number of people. There are only so many boards you can fly around and sit on, right? So that helps craft kind of the size of the deals you want to do too, right? So it's an interesting moment in time. So I would highly recommend, if you're sitting down with a venture capitalist, be respectful and do the right thing and understand what their drivers are. The person that, you're not getting a meeting unless there's interest typically derived from an individual and relationship that's created transitively. Talk to that person about why they're interested. If you don't know, make friends with an investment banker and ask them what they're interested in buying. Why are they excited about this stuff? All right, maybe they're trying to enter a market. Hitachi Capital, you guys know Hitachi Capital? Right, out of Japan, they don't see enough deal flow. You know what the advice an investment banker gave Hitachi Capital was? Overpay for a company, and you'll get all the deal flow you want. Just one time. Overpay for it. You'll have them knocking at the door. Right? What if you're that one company? Can I look at you and explain to you why Hitachi paid 10x on revs for a company that had no promising future? It was a moment in time. Right? You might be that guy, probably not. But you might be. It'd be awesome if you were. So, so I apologize. Who's with this? Yeah, hit me.
So we have difficulty in probably deciding how to who's sort of funding us to give them. And we didn't discuss about the total value of the company.
Right. Right.
So my point was, if someone is really putting money, I really that maybe it's money to start a company, then probably I am really at a compromising situation. I'm unable to decide how much exactly.
Right.
Because I barely need that money to start my stuff.
Right.
So that's the big one.
How much does a Series A company you typically end up with your company when you leave? Early stage venture fund. How much do they walk away with? Anybody know? Yes. Was that? Somewhere between 38 to 50%. Right. So think about that. That plays a lot in the psyche of what they're trying to do. Understanding how much they have to put to work, understanding the types of things they invest in, understanding how many people they have to go sit on all those boards, right? Understanding how much they expect to own that company when they're done, that drives a lot of that, do we fit that? Do we fit that? Because that's what drives them. People think, oh my God, I have the greatest thing in the world, I'm gonna change the world, and they're gonna see all this great value, whatever. And then the guy's sitting there going, I gotta do one more healthcare deal this time. And that's his driver, right? That might be his driver. I don't wanna get on a plane and fly to New York. If I have to sit on one more board, I'll kill myself, right? Those are the things that drive these guys. It's interesting. So, okay. Over here?
So we had 15% to the university, and then 55% to the execution, but this was the most important piece from your presentation, and then 30% to investors.
Did you guys think about valuation, you're thinking about the money, or just kind of, that was what was left over?
I thought about it a little bit. I've heard $3 million is a pretty good seed startup, $10 million valuation there, so.
So you want to do 3 and 10? For the first Series A? That'd be awesome. So what do you think the typical seed size of funding is? Anybody know? What is venture early stage seed round?
What is
For a new company with no revenue?
IT or devices or?
Not pharma, not med device.
C350.
What's that? Seed? Somewhere between 350 and 750, right? Probably not gonna get through that. That'd be awesome. Cool. Now, a follow-on round you might, right? So I'm going to do. So my deal, we did 750, we did $1.5 million, and then we did 5, and we just kind of. So, and depending on if they want to write it up or not, they ultimately might end up getting $3 million, right? But we probably have to work. So, a lot of people grossly overestimate the value of the company. If you really want to turn venture capitalists off super fast, go in with an insane valuation. Not because they will be, well, yes, partly because they will be abhorrent by your general thinking that you are that valuable, but they will question your insanity and intelligence. That's really what it comes down to. If you walk in and go, man, this thing's worth $10 million, me and this guy Bob, and we think this is going to be amazing, they're like, it's so nice to meet you guys. We'll call you. It's just
that reaction of John.
It's cute, they call themselves the capitalists. But yeah, I mean, so be mindful of that, right? It's really, if you're going to ask for something that's out of the norm, you better have unbelievable data to support it. You better, and because they will, like I said, they will cut you. They're so good at that. They'll walk in and go, we want to do 520 million pre, and we think that, yeah, they're going to go, no, that's not happening. Awesome. How about you guys down here?
Okay, so what we have here is that we define the idea. One is the founders, the people that have been there from day one, they've been working day in, day out, and they're left with around 40%. We had the execution being defined as the employees, the 15 full-time employees that we have, and that's around 10%, and then the people invested in our company around 50%. Right now we don't have an option for anything like that, because most of their time is spent trying to define what exactly was encompassed in the idea and what exactly was encompassed in execution.
We argued, so you can see his numbers.
One of them are correct.
You should, yeah, absolutely.
Somewhere between 10 and 50%.
And that's it. And here's the thing about this, guys. And that was part of the reason I wanted to give a limited amount of narrative is because I wanted to create the maximum amount of discourse and disagreement. Because that's really what this stuff is about, right? It's stating a position predicated on as much data as you can possibly muster and holding firm, but realizing you probably want in there, most likely. It's like anything else you negotiate, right? So that is important, and I would argue that exercise is important. You know, having that exercise with people that you're going to run a company tells you a lot about them pretty quickly.
Well, I think the one cool thing, I think we, or at least I got out of it, was I think we clearly recognized after fighting for a little bit that these numbers would probably change dramatically from me and you sitting at the table
Absolutely.
to, you know,
Absolutely.
actually as the company grows, right? It's going to go.
Absolutely. That's exactly correct. What did Patton say about plans of war? He rarely survived the first cannon shot. It's exactly how these tactics work, right? So, yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned about with tech transfer.
Yeah.
So what do you get in scenarios where like your university automatically thinks about like 30% to the, because you talked about like bypassing that a bit earlier. What did you mean by that? Or just dealing with them? You mentioned 5% earlier.
So what I was saying is when you have, there's two different ways you can approach ideation in university. You can go directly with tech transfer office, and they have very strict, rigid rules around how they do their tech transfer, right? Or you can go to the individual, right? And you can negotiate with the individual, and you can have them act on your behalf to request to go to the university. Your only position to strong arm a university is awesome. Who else is waiting in line with cash to go do this? I'm telling you, that's it. Your only bargaining power is it can sit on the shelf, or I can go commercial. It's your call. In a very nice way, very non-confrontational.
To that, what is sort of the basic legal, say, position of, say, founders or inventors relative to, say, the university or the assignment?
Depends upon your EA. Look at your employment agreement. It varies wildly. I mean, your employment agreement, I would recommend if you are at a university and you're thinking about licensing something out, talk to the tech transfer office, and look at your employment agreement. I can guarantee you it tells you very clearly who owns that IP. Right? You got a check from that university to work there. What did you think that check was for? Because you're handsome. Yes.
Because like when you mentioned that, like, who else is in commercialize? Because I know some universities like Texas, if you use their facilities, that in turn gives them that right or that portion of that.
Absolutely.
So in that case, you could have it.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Awesome. Just one thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, sir.
I have a question about revenue versus venture capital.
Yes, sir.
In your experience, have you always had to go through all the way through Series C to get an exit, or have you been able to say, we're making money, I don't need to go back to ask for more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, first and foremost, when it comes to venture capital, under no circumstances should you take it if you have any other option. It is the most expensive, most painful money you can possibly raise. So absolutely at every inflection point, look what you can do in terms of finding other non-dilutive sources of capital in order to not take that money down. So the great thing about things like tech transfer is you can do interesting things like SRAs. You can look at $50 million of my raise came from the Department of Defense. So there's a lot of really wonderful grants that are out there that you can take advantage of. For a while, there was this wonderful Texas-specific, what's it called? Thank you. It's gone now. But it was here for a while. So there are, be aware of those non-dilutive sources. Absolutely, your goal at every inflection point in your capital raise should be a milestone that drives you towards revenue. Because the faster you hit those revenue targets, the quicker you're not beholden to outside capital, which will greatly impact the way you run your business. You absolutely can. I did one round, in 10X Labs, I did one funding round. It was Intel Computer Corporation, and it was the last funding round I did. We cash flowed the entire thing after that. I have friends that have done companies, all bootstrap. Friends and family, Amex cards, whatever. It's hard to do when you're in your 40s. It is. You got kids, I got a house. I've got an ex-wife, she's got a house. She's got 2 houses now. Cost prohibitive, right? It's difficult to do. When you're young, oh my God, do this when you're young. Please do it early and young because you can fail and it just will not even affect you. I lost my Toyota Corolla. You're going to be fine. So, I would say this, the more you can do with the fewest resources and take as much suffering as you possibly can, which is when you're young, you can do these things, it reduces what you have to get to from a burn perspective to run your business. Cash flow break even is the goal, right? What's the burn rate? How quickly I get that? And if you can do that in an A, if you can do it in a B, if you can do it with none of it, man, that's the dream. I will tell you in health IT and things like that is very difficult. Med device, it's very, very difficult because they tend to be very capital intensive. For my business, there's a legislative federal component to it. There's a regulatory component. I had to put $5 million in before I could even start to license, start to sell it. Because that was just it. You can't go out and pre-sell before you receive your FDA clearance because you don't have your labeling. If you don't have your labeling, you don't know what your product does. If you don't know what your product does, you can't tell people what it does and when they should buy it. So I spent $5 million before I could even sell one. So it depends upon the category whether or not that's practical. There's also an entire side of the business where you might not ever have a company, right? DNAtrix will probably never, ever, ever sell a single drop of its product before it gets acquired. I would bet. If Imran was in here, he'd probably say, yeah, he's probably right. Right? Pharmacy companies rely on smart professors to do all the R&D, take all the risks. They pick the winners, they buy the winners.
That's almost universal agri strategy.
Absolutely. No question. I will say this. Yeah, I know, I've never seen it the other way. I've seen some med device companies that were repurposed, like they pivoted and they were like, oh, well, look, you know, it also does this. And you're like, that was weird. But yeah, from intention, no, that's how they all go. They never see it. Why do you think J&J is here, right? You're just looking for things to pick off. You'll never see a customer. You'll never sell to anybody other than that, right? So, Health Post, HIT deal. They had one customer, Wall Herman. They sold it to an advisory world company for $50 million. It was one dude, an idea in 18 months. That's pretty damn good IRR, right? It doesn't suck. So. Anything else? We're kind of out of time. I'm happy to stay and chat as long as you guys want.
Yeah, let's
I really appreciate your guys' time.
Let's do questions afterwards if you've got any, but thank Bryan for coming.
Yeah.